Good afternoon, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show here on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM, broadcasting all across central Indiana. In the studio today is Mike Wilson. Welcome back, Mike.
Well, thank you, John.
Justin George.
Thank you, John.
And Aiden Marietta.
Always great to be here.
Welcome, folks. So, folks, I am John Rust, your friend and farmer from Seymour, Indiana, a rare actual conservative getting involved in Indiana politics. We have a lot of people that pretend to be conservative in Indiana, but they are not. We are up against a GOP establishment that is up to no good, and we're going to be delving right into that. But first, there's some major news this past week. Habemus Papam. We have a pope, a new pope.
Yes, we do. History has been made. Something, and Justin and I watched it. We're watching it together now. I'm not Catholic, but he is, so... But even for non-Catholics, it was a special day. And just watching the first American Pope, something nobody ever thought would be possible, has been elected. Pope Leo the 14th. The reaction from all the newsrooms, they were all shocked. I think everybody was as shocked as we were.
Yeah, no one saw this one coming.
Nobody did.
He had a 1% chance in the betting markets going in.
I don't usually do the betting markets, but but when he came out right from the balcony, it was really a surreal moment to see an American come up as the head of the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
and my hope is that I wish him so much of the best. And I think what he seems to be aiming to do, what looks like he's off to a start so far, is uniting the church together. And I think that's important. Very important.
I was listening to Casey Daniels on the Kendall and Casey show this week, and she brought out a wonderful quote. Thank you, Casey, for finding this, from Leo the 13th. The fact that God has given the earth for the use and enjoyment of the whole human race can in no way be a bar to the owning of private property. Pope Leo the 14th, the new pope, named himself after Leo the 13th, and we are hoping that this is a sign that he is aligning with that conservative pope in the past. So,
Yep.
But it's a great sign that this pope, or the Pope the 13th, was talking about the rights of private property, something here in Indiana that is being brushed aside, unbelievably, by the Indiana GOP. And I just think that's crazy to even say that, but it's the truth. Look at what is happening with property taxes. Property taxes are really you paying rent on property you paid for to the government just to stay on the property you paid for. We have to have real property tax reform in Indiana because we all see what these assessments are coming in at. My own personal view is assessments need to be changed, and it needs to be at the price you paid. It should not be going up every year. The price you paid should be what the rate is set at, because you cannot tax unrealized gains. And that's exactly what Indiana is doing by raising your property values every year. They are making you pay higher and higher property taxes, and they have this $300 rebate this past year that's coming in. But it in no way makes up for how much your property taxes are really going up, because the local assessors are just juicing these rates on what your property is worth. In a lot of cases, more than what you could really actually ever sell it for. It is absolutely wrong. Private property is where we are today, but not in Indiana. We have to have real property tax reform, and we're going to be getting into that on a later show. But back on the Pope, just a fantastic day in history. We don't really know his political views yet, but it's just a great day for religious people all across the world to celebrate the
conclave.
It was so surreal too, and to think about taking the name Pope Leo the 14th, and the fact that, just like you fantastically pointed out, John and Aiden, how taking the name after the previous Pope, Pope Leo the 13th, it's really neat to see, because Pope Leo the 13th also fought against socialism, and there's historic Pope Leos. The names is fantastic. The first Pope Leo was historic as well in the 400s, so it's really neat to see the name that he's taken after and what he's going to do to shepherd people, and it's incredibly exciting.
So it's a good sign.
Yes.
Definitely.
But back on property rights, my father in 1978 had these placards printed up that were about 2 feet by 2 feet in size on cardboard color with the American flag that said, "Property rights are human rights." In 1978, my family had to fight tooth and nail for the right to build a chicken farm on land we owned in Jackson County. This is one of the reasons I got into political sphere, is because I have firsthand experience in how government wants to pick winners and losers. Government wants to say, no, you can't do this, and other things can be done. For instance, we're going to get into this in a little bit on what's going on with Eli Lilly. They are picking and choosing winners and losers in the state of Indiana. It should be up to the private property owners to decide what their property is used for. You shouldn't be forced to sell out to me to build an egg farm. It's your property. You should be able to keep it if you want. If you want to sell it to Eli Lilly, fantastic. They are almost $1 trillion company. They have the money. They can buy it from you at a price that you demand.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be the government coming in and forcing you to sell it.
Exactly.
And they're one of the biggest companies, not just in Indiana, but in the United States and probably the world.
Right. So in other news this past week, I want to touch on this. We just attended, there was a Lincoln Day dinner here in Johnson County last week, and fantastic food, a beautiful venue. Congratulations to the local GOP for putting out just a fantastic event. But there was a politician there who was getting ready to run for the Senate from Kentucky, apparently, and he said something that kind of hit me, and I wanted to think about this a week before I talked about it. He talked about how the GOP should be welcoming to liberals. I'm not sure this is the exact quote, but it was something about the GOP should be the party of sane liberals and sane conservatives, just sane people. I think the GOP should be the party of conservatives. I think we have to be about fiscal responsibility. Instead, the GOP, sadly, has become this party of government where it's just, let's win an election and then do nothing, which is what's happening here in our Congress. It's just the big problem facing the GOP today in Indiana. It was this quote, we're the party of sane liberals. We shouldn't be the party of sane liberals. We should be the party of conservatives. Indiana is a red state. Career politicians are at their heart liberals because they believe in government. They are a part of government. You can't be a career politician and be a true conservative. I mean, there are just so few. Thomas Massey, Chip Roy, there's a few out there, but I mean, it's less than 1% of the politicians in Washington, I would say, are true conservatives.
Exactly.
Most of them are like Todd Young and Jim Banks, where they're pretend conservatives, but they vote liberal ways. Just look at the national debt. When Todd Young and Jim Banks, how they both voted, the national debt per taxpayer was $170,000 per debt when both of those guys were sworn into Congress in 2017. Today, it is over $323,000 per taxpayer. And both Jim Banks and Todd Young just recently voted for trillions of dollars more in new government debt. We need economic conservatives who know how to balance an account book in D.C., and they certainly do not. They refuse to do any meaningful cuts. They talk about, we'll cut in the future, but they never actually do any cutting. So back to how this relates to Indiana and property taxes. What's happened is we had this quote-unquote property tax reform, which the GOP is advertising as a property tax cut, but that's baloney. We are actually having an increase in taxes because of the assessments, and the Indiana GOP and Governor Braun, unfortunately, just signed this, now increases local income taxes. They talked about, how it raised the top rates they could tax, but a lot of local entities just did not even tax at all. Now they are, because they've discovered they can. And they are taxing at, the rates are sometimes double what they were previously. This is from Daniel O'Leary. Local option income tax increases are now a foregone conclusion. Hoosier wage earners and pensioners' net pay will soon get smaller. And how this relates is what happened right here in Franklin. Franklin Council adopts a wheel and excise taxes in response to new law. If Johnson County retains its wheel and excise taxes, Franklin residents may be taxed from both the county and the city. This is because certain language preventing double taxes was removed from the law before it was passed by the Indiana General Assembly, said Lynn Gray, city attorney. She mostly referred to it as a layered tax, similar to property taxes. So what's happening is one of these new local taxes forced on Hoosiers by, if you all remember, Carlin, the charlatan yodeler, when he was in the state Senate, voted for 92 of these local income taxes. We have to have, conservatives, folks. Why can't we have conservatives running in the Republican Party? Why do we get all these lobbyists like Yodeler and these career politicians who say one thing and do the exact opposite? It's
a mess.
Pathetic.
Complete mess. Pathetic.
Well, and it's back to picking winners and losers. The Indiana Economic Development Foundation has poured more than $13 million into travel, administrative, and other expenses across 6 years, according to an audited financial report released Thursday by Governor Mike Braun's orders. What is going on at the IEDC? And well, who's paying for that? $13 million in travel? And that was before the toll roads are coming. Imagine what they're going to get when we have to pay the toll on I-65 and 465 coming up. Ugh. This is why I am bringing this up, folks. I want to be the flashlight and raise the curtain on what's going on both here in Indiana and in Washington, D.C. So, folks, when we get back, we'll get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Here in the studio with Aid Marietta, Justin George, and Mike Wilson.
Hello, John.
Great to be here.
So what we're talking about, the main topic today is our Congress. What is the point of having a GOP majority Senate and House of Representatives? This is from an article by Sean Fleetwood, and this was published in thefederalist.com. The headline, what's become increasingly clear is that absent Trump and a few Republicans, and I named, Chip Roy and Thomas Massie earlier as a few, the GOP lacks the willingness and ability to govern. We have the majority today, folks.
And the mandate.
Throughout the 2024 election cycle, Republicans pledged that if elected, they would use their congressional majorities to reverse disastrous policies enacted by President Biden and the Democrats. Whether it was bringing down Bidenflation or curbing the border invasion, the campaign message from the GOP was clear: elect us and we will fix it. We are in, I think, day 120 of this congressional session. And all we've had is a bill unbelievably voting or funding Joe Biden's funding priorities for Planned Parenthood,
murder,
for all the Green New Deal scam. What's going on with that? We're going to be talking about that next week. The funding, it is just incredulous to me that Jim Banks and Todd Young and Aaron Houchin, they all come to the Lincoln Day dinners here, and they say, oh, we're conservative. This is rah, rah, rah. All they can point to is Donald Trump's accomplishments. They can't point to any of their own, other than their accomplishment is funding Joe Biden's continuing resolution when Trump was president. That's absolutely unacceptable. Thomas Massie has called them out repeatedly on that.
Love Thomas Massie. He's great.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's one of the good ones.
They have zero interest in repealing Biden's Inflation Reduction Act or making significant reforms to Medicaid. And that's not talking about cuts, folks. That's just talking about the scams that are going on where people are claiming with false Social Security numbers benefits they're not entitled to. We have to make it so that legal residents of Indiana and our country can have the benefits we paid for. Instead, Congress refuses to do anything about it. They just continually fund massive new increases for people that are not really entitled to those services.
That's very sad.
Right. This is back to the article. If electing Republicans is only about temporarily stopping the bleeding caused by Democrats without repealing their disastrous policies and replacing them with conservative-based solutions, then what is a point of having a Republican-run Congress at all? We are setting ourselves up for disaster in the midterms, and I think that's by intent.
Yeah.
Hakeem Jeffries basically has the de facto gavel already, so...
And soon he'll have it in his hands if this keeps going.
Well, why is the Republican Congress funding Planned Parenthood? Planned Parenthood is prescribing today cross-sex hormones for minors, same-day prescriptions via virtual appointments. They told our 16-year-old female investigator she could receive testosterone quickly, easily, and with little screening. This is from Lila Rose on X. There is so much going on that is being paid for by the Republican GOP. What is going on with that?
Exactly.
Whatever happened to the right to life? How about our God-given rights?
Well, they're not showing up for work. The problem with the Senate is they're only working, 2 days a week.
It's a pretty nice gig.
Look at, Jim Banks this week. He was tweeting, this was a tweet from Thursday. Why wasn't he working? It says, thank you to my friend Marsha Blackburn for inviting me to speak this morning at your annual policy summit. We should be in Washington cutting government spending, cutting taxes, reforming the government to conservative ideals rather than just flapping your jaws about it at some seminar somewhere. President Trump has almost working 24 hours a day since he was sworn in, and the Republican Congress has only worked with 25 of the 115 days.
Yeah.
Very low.
They almost don't show up at all. Or if they don't show up at all, in the case of Jim Banks, last time I checked, he missed 30% of the votes.
And I would just add, Marsha Blackburn's not doing her job either, and she's possibly going to ask for a promotion to be governor, which she should not go even anywhere near that.
And I'll just say right now, she would be a continuation of the horrible policies under RINO Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee. She's just going to continue to perpetuate that if she's governor. But that's how it works with these career politicians. They love to talk. And going back to the right to life thing, nothing makes me more frustrated as a young conservative than seeing the fact that these so-called Republicans, I say that with air quotes, they don't care about the right to life and that each of us are made in the image of God. That they could care less about. They could care less about that.
Well, and then specifically the continuing resolution in 2023 that Jim Banks skipped the vote for, that Aaron Hounchin voted for, had actual funding for abortion clinics in it. Pure and simple. Actual funding.
And you can go to the bill and you can see what...
And they claim to be pro-life here in Indiana.
Exactly.
Pro-life in name only.
It's say one thing when you're at a Lincoln Day dinner, and it's vote the exact opposite in D.C. And this is from Guy Benson on X. He says he's hearing fresh rumblings that some in the House GOP are going to push for tax increases in the version of the big, beautiful bill. If they're going to be unserious about cutting spending and also raise taxes, what is the point of Republicans? They are a mirror of the liberal Democrats. We should not be a liberal tax and spend party. That's what we are hearing now from our GOP. Aaron Hounchin, you are in the majority in the House of Representatives. You are in leadership. Why on earth are we talking about tax increases? We should be talking about tax cuts. We should be talking about vastly reduced government spending. In my own opinion, we have to start as a baseline, just bare minimum, of going back to pre-COVID levels. But that is just a pipe dream to the GOP today. They're like, oh no, we got to keep spending. There is no concept of business and of financial planning in Congress. They have no clue about it. The first official U.S. coin, when it was minted, had inscribed on it, "Mind your business."
Wow.
And that was a quote from Benjamin Franklin. And what he was talking about is America was a nation of shopkeepers. He says you have to watch the till. You have to be fiscally prudent. We are not being that today. Today it is just finding new ways to tax and spend. Tax and spend. This is from Matt Walsh. Republicans control Congress and the White House. Why I'll say heck, are we still sending hundreds of millions of dollars a year, again, to Planned Parenthood? Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron, why are you all funding this? That is not acceptable. We are a party. The GOP should be the party of life. Yeah. They talk about that in Indiana when they visit, but when they go back to D.C., it's always the exact opposite. So back on this, where's the GOP Congress? There are 2,000 migrants still housed in New York City's historic Roosevelt Hotel, despite the city saying it will shutter the shelter next month. Guess who's paying for that, really? It was being paid through USAID, and that was funded directly by the House GOP and the Senate GOP. In this last...
And Jim Banks, they're funding it.
And keep in mind, they're the ones who say, "Oh, we're shutting it down." Well, they're not shutting it down.
They have not shut down anything. No. So this is from Daniel Horowitz. So 2 interesting observations here. This is talking about there was a letter just addressed in Congress that demands $2 trillion in cuts. And I want to congratulate Victoria Spartz and Marlon Stutzman, who actually signed this letter calling for actual cuts. Kudos. Thank goodness.
Good on both of them.
Yes,
we have 2 Indiana Congress women and men who have actually stood up to the plate, folks, and are talking about doing actual spending cuts. And that's the first we've heard of this year. Jim Banks, Todd Young have been totally silent. They're like, let's keep spending into oblivion. Yeah. Aaron Hounshin will. It is important that we cut at least $2 trillion out of, listen to this, $89 trillion spending. And after they campaigned about biblical overspending, and they are spending at the rate of 99% of that, and we're going to cut maybe 1%. That's just, it's hypocrisy. So folks, when we get back, we'll come right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. In other news this past week, President Trump's nominee for U.S. Attorney for D.C., Ed Martin, faced the GOP establishment led by Jim Banks, Todd Young, and it fell apart. This is from Brianna Morello on Twitter. Senator Thom Tillis is blocking Trump's pick for U.S. Attorney for D.C., Ed Martin. If Martin doesn't get in, Marxist Judge Boasberg will have the power to appoint Martin's replacement. Steve Bannon says that should be the end of Tillis's political career. Instead, what is the establishment GOP going on? Listen to this, folks. Tillis actually voted to confirm Merrick Garland. Tillis continues to work his, butt off against Trump's agenda. And they are all behind the scenes doing this. I think he's the one that just, drew the short straw and said, okay, who are we going to use to stop Trump from actually getting the people he wants in office? Thune suggested that as long as Tillis is a member of the Judiciary Committee, the nomination is unlikely to advance in the Senate. This is what Thom Tillis had to say about this directly. If Mr. Martin was being put up for U.S. Attorney in any other district other than where January 6th happened, I would support him. What kind of logic is that? That's corrupted logic.
That sounds like a word salad to me.
He admits the man is qualified, just not for that district where he might actually hold powerful people accountable. That's not principle, that's protection. That's not law and order, that's political obedience. That's from Real PDB123 on X. Fantastic points. We have to ask, who is in his ear and why? That's what everyone should figure out. They are all hiding something. Why wasn't Tillis removed from that committee so that the nomination could go forward? Republicans have a strong majority in the Senate. Trump won. His nominees deserve GOP votes. But instead, the Republican Senate is controlled by the enemy. we have the majority, but they refuse to do anything. Tillis is blocking Ed Martin, which means that the lawless judge Boasberg will have total power to appoint Martin's replacement. This means more lawfare against Trump, and I think that's the real agenda. And what I'm talking about on this judge appointing the replacement, this is in federal law. It's U.S. Code 546 on vacancies. If an appointment expires under subsection C2, the district court for such district may appoint a United States attorney to serve until the vacancy is filled. The U.S. Senate is walking away from doing anything about what Trump is really wanting to do. Instead, they are allowing this federal judge to appoint the successor rather than President Trump. This is a big, big deal. Thom Tillis, he voted for President Biden's appointments. He voted for Anthony Blinken. He voted for Janet Yellen. He voted for Lloyd Austin, Merrick Garland, Pete Buttigieg, and Gina Raimondo. He voted for all those, but he won't vote for one of President Trump's appointees. This is a quote from Thom Tillis. Merrick Garland has an outstanding record serving our country and has a deep understanding of the law. His experience reflects his extensive legal knowledge and unbiased application of the law. Baloney. I'm using a polite term there, folks.
So that probably means that he wanted to confirm him when he was Barack Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court.
Well, this is from Daniel Horowitz. This is what's really going on behind the scenes, folks. For years, Thom Tillis has worked assiduously to get repeat drug offender and trafficker and gangbangers released from prison. Similar to Todd Young and Jim Banks, who both voted for the First Step Act, which released drug dealers from prison early, including fentanyl dealers. You know, where are we at when these people that are so soft on crime won't let President Trump appoint someone who will actually go after criminals? You know, if you do the crime, you have to do the time. It's pure and simple. And we have to remember also, Thom Tillis was the guy behind Hegseth's ex-sister-in-law last-minute hit on him. If you recall, this was back in January 28th of this year. They say that Thom Tillis is the one who was actually trying to sink Hegseth's nomination, who Trump appointed to be Secretary of Defense. And Todd Young and Jim Banks said, oh yeah, we support him. But what was really going on behind the scenes? They actually were trying to stop President Trump from getting that nomination.
And I would just point out that Thom Tillis has primary challengers, two of them. One of them's named Don Brown, another is named Andy Nilsen. And Thom Tillis has the endorsement, I just might add, of Jim Banks.
Well, folks, you know, this everything about Jim Banks, you just think, oh, he can't go any lower. Guess what he did? This is a list of Republican senators who recently held a fundraiser to kick off North Carolina GOP Senator Thom Tillis's 2026 campaign. Headliner number 1, Jim Banks.
Of course.
Guess who else? Lisa Murkowski.
That's the one from Alaska.
Sounds about right.
And Jim Lankford.
The one who came with the amnesty bill.
Yes. Well, and that makes sense with Banks because Banks is calling for an influx of immigrants, according to the Atlantic magazine. Why do we get these politicians? It's the establishment, folks. They are all in it for themselves, not for President Trump, not for Hoosiers. They are only in it for their own careers. So Jim Banks is going to fight tooth and nail for Thom Tillis over anyone that's really a conservative going against him. You know, Jim Banks, he pretends to be conservative. And I don't understand that in Indiana. I mean, you see people saying, oh, he's so conservative. Yeah, he talks conservative,
Yeah, it's real
but he
conservative.
votes liberal.
It's real conservative to go against pro-life, isn't it, Jim Banks?
Well, and look what he did on just voting for $5 trillion in new debt just a couple of weeks ago again. Oh. So back to the Senate not doing their job. Well, Jim Banks is out talking at a seminar somewhere. The U.S. Senate is doing nothing on open federal judge positions. Did you know there are 46 currently open federal judge positions? And leader John Thune and Jim Banks, they are just letting the clock run as Democrat activist judges block Trump's agenda. There are 46 open federal judges, and the U.S. Senate has done nothing to get any of Trump's nominees passed. They are just sitting on the sidelines. They're watching the clock tick. How come Democrats were able to get activist judges confirmed with speed after the election with President Biden in 2021? They were just zipped through. We're at 125 days, and you've not even heard of any Senate hearings on any judges. You haven't even heard a word about it. What Republicans have confirmed? Zero. Zip. Not one. Speaker Johnson addressed this recently. He said judicial impeachments are never off the table. but they're never on the table either.
They're put them on the table.
Right. It's always talk, never, ever action. This is from the Indy Oracle on Twitter. By keeping district courts in the constitutional lane, there is no reference to district courts in the United States Constitution. None. They are a fabrication of the United States Congress, mostly to provide a way of deflecting blame away from Congress for unpopular decisions. Local judges, unelected and answerable to no one, should not be able to issue nationwide injunctions. They were never given such authority. The reason they get away with that is that no one has ever told them no. These are statements of fact, and our Republican GOP and Senate does nothing about it. Folks, we have to have a Congress that acts rather than goes on vacation or goes to speak at seminars. We need actual votes on codifying every single one of President Trump's executive orders into federal law. But that's not happening. The GOP is sitting by the sidelines doing nothing. Folks, this is John Rust. We'll get right back to this on The John Rust Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. I was talking about Thom Tillis and these federal judges and U.S. senators who are doing nothing. GOP Senator James Lankford, who campaigns with Jim Banks for Thom Tillis, says illegal immigrants deserve due process. They didn't take due process or apply for due process when they came here. Do you know that President Eisenhower removed 1.5 million illegal immigrants, and there is not one record of that being quote-unquote lawfare back then? It's because people like Jim Banks, who want an influx of immigrants, are working behind the scenes to actually stop President Trump. Yes, they say one thing totally different when they're at a Lincoln Day dinner here or on their Twitter account. It's totally opposite. But the action, and the action always speaks louder than words. Look at what the U.S. Senate has done. Zip, zilch, nada. You know what they just did this past Thursday? Congress recessed and went on another 4-day vacation after they just had a 2-week vacation. So they worked 2 days after being off for 2 weeks and then decide, oh, we're going on vacation again. Well, President Trump and his cabinet, they're still working every day. President Trump, he's getting wore down by this. It's hard to see how he has to carry the weight of everything, how the federal GOP has just done nothing. They are sitting there like bumps on a log. They tweet about it. This is Jim Banks. At Senate Democrats, do you also oppose the deportation of this depraved illegal alien?
What I would just ask, what about your remarks on Atlantic Magazine's, to the Atlantic Magazine, Senator, when you called for an influx of immigration?
Yeah.
And how about the vote record going back from your time in the House and that you voted for these things? It's out there.
It's all talk. It's all tweets and zero action. The Senate Republicans are sabotaging the America First agenda. They seem to be choosing and ignoring the mandates we issued on Election Day. these same RINOs would prefer to go back to the days of corruption. It's not happening. We need to send a clear message to the Republicans who are purposely ignoring the voters. Where are you, leader John Thune? Where are you, Jim Banks? Where are you, Todd Young? Why are we sitting here 125 days into this session and nothing has happened? Why does it take Elon Musk having to do everything? Elon Musk revealed that Doge has discovered 100,000 federal workers who applied for and received unemployment benefits while they were working. That's called fraud. They need to be arrested. Arrested, pure and simple. That's fraud.
Which is a crime.
Exactly. There needs to be consequences.
But the GOP House and Senate sits there and does absolutely nothing. In my whole life, I've never seen a Senate leader who was so silent. When the Democrats were in control of the majority, they were always in the media and promoting their agenda, despite the fact that it was destroying the United States of America.
I can remember Schumer going on TV all the time.
Well, they go on TV, but they don't. The difference was the Democrats were enacting stuff. Today, the Republican Senate and House are doing absolutely nothing. Zip, zilch, nada.
When the Democrats are in power at the Senate, the House, or even at the state levels across the country, they always get their agenda done. When the Republicans are in power, with a few exceptions, they like to talk.
Well, President Trump, God love him, he's going to reopen Alcatraz.
I saw that.
And I think that's great. Who should go in there first? They should just fill it up with the career politicians.
Put them all in there. Let's go. Let's do it.
Anyone that voted for a debt increase needs to go to Alcatraz, in my opinion. If you can't cut spending, you should not be in Congress or the Senate, period. Instead, you should be in Alcatraz doing time because you lied. You lied to your voters here in Indiana by saying you were a conservative and you were for fiscal responsibility when you go there and vote the exact opposite. Thomas Massey, I want to get into this. This is very important. He says, this was not widely covered in the news, so I will tell you. Congress was scheduled to vote on rescissions this past week to cut the waste that Doge has found, but the vote was quietly canceled. USAID and other programs like PBS and NPR were to be targeted. They were going to cut the funding. So, folks, on these rescission packages, all it takes is the majority vote in both the Senate and the House and President Trump's signature, and it's the law of the land. And the House dropped the ball. They didn't even hold the vote. So PBS is still being funded. President Trump wants to defund NPR, but guess what? Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron Hounchin, they just go on vacation and go speak at a seminar somewhere rather than stick around and actually vote on something of consequence. In early 2025, House Republican leaders tentatively plan to vote on rescission package proposed by President Donald Trump during the week of May 5th, 2025. The package was expected to be sent to Congress in April 2025 to cancel $9.3 billion in a previously approved funding, primarily targeting foreign aid programs, the State Department, and public broadcasting entities like PBS and NPR. Again, all this takes was a simple majority vote. And as Bob Good says, the number one responsibility of the House is managing the nation's finances. This was a massive fail. Instead, they go on vacation. This is from Daniel Horowitz on Congress. He says, I wish these Republicans would go before a camera and thank Joe Biden for his spending. Evidently, there is not a single program they would ever even slow the growth of. And they will fight to the bitter end to protect every last dime. So wasn't Biden right? That's what seems to be happening by Jim Banks and Todd Young and Aaron Hounchin. Why are they going along with Biden rather than President Trump?
Exactly.
We are over $36 trillion in debt. We have a $2 trillion deficit. And we are not at war with anyone, and all they want to do is increase spending. It's crazy. Folks, we're out of time. It has been a pleasure to be with you this week. I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So, folks, see you next week on the radio. And you can also look for this show on Spotify, Amazon, and iHeartRadio. So, folks, see you all again next week. Thank you.